Oops, sorry, I had my mic on my head. I just switched our layout to our question and answer layout so that it's a little bit easier for us to ask questions but not have more than one conversation going. To remind all of our participants, you can type in your question and submit it at any time. It goes over to a question bank and then we'll release them one at a time. You can submit the questions that you already submitted on email or if you came up with a new one. Before we started the questions, I wanted to say I thought it was really interesting that in our two talks today, we talked about how getting people to wildlife can increase the conservation of it, and then how having better conservation can get more people to wildlife. So that's maybe a circle that can help improve our water quality that I noticed as a theme through both of our talks. I can see that a few people are typing questions. I'm going to grab one from actually one of our participants couldn't be here tonight, so I'm going to submit her question. Anne asks, what percentage of the lakes in Iowa were made by glaciers?
There's probably about 30 of our lakes in terms of that aspect of our significant public resources, our significant publicly owned lakes. A lot of our natural water systems too, in terms of especially shallower systems throughout the state, where we also have systems that have been drained throughout history. So really, in terms of now, it's about something like that. About 30 of our 130 significant lakes are natural systems.
Travis asks, if farmers are building small ponds by damming up a small stream, how does this affect the environment as a whole? And do they need to get some kind of permission to do so?
If it gets to be a large enough, if you have about this is Mike, if you have a little over 50, if you're impounding 15 acre feet of water or more, and an acre foot of water is 1 acre 1 foot deep. But most of our farmers go through the NRCS or the SCS, Soil Conservation Service, when they're building their ponds. So it can impact the environment, but most of the time they don't. We have close to 100,000 farm ponds in the state of Iowa. If you ever get up in a small plane or if you're flying over Iowa, you'll note just what you view is not much water, you believe, when you get out there, especially in central and southern Iowa. There's just ponds, small ponds everywhere. So you do need some permits if you're building the larger ponds, and the average size of a farm pond has actually been increasing. So what I'd suggest to Travis or any others, one of your best contacts is within each county. There's the Natural Resources Service conservation districts there, the NRCS, a federal agency, and our district soil commissioners. And you get in touch with those folks because they will be the resource that you can work with on farm ponds.
Thank you. And Margaret asks, do we presently have any lakes in Iowa that were formed as a result of a stream being used to produce electricity?
In our lakes as such here in Iowa, most of them we do not have hydroelectric generation. Some of what we would call on-stream impoundments. There used to be some hydro structures on some of our small river systems. For example, that failed dam over in northeast Iowa, Lake Delhi. They were planning on bringing back hydroelectric opportunities. The key is you have to have enough water consistently moving through there to provide demand, and we just don't have the large river resources for that. And none of our lakes really as such are producing hydro, because when you do that in most of these systems, you have to be prepared for significant fluctuations in lake level. And many of our lakes are multi-use systems there, and if the lake's down 10 or 15 feet, that's not necessarily desirable from a recreation standpoint.
I can definitely agree with that. I have another question from Jeremy. He asks about what percentage of our drinking water comes from Iowa lakes? And I guess I would add to that, is it localized to certain parts of the state, or is it pretty much spread all across the state?
Well, it's primarily, it would be the central and southern part of the state, because the aquifer there is either it's real shallow water that's not very doesn't meet our drinking water, what you'd want as standards, or it's deep enough that it really picks up a lot of mineralization, and it requires a lot of treatment to work with. You know, Sayreville and Red Rock, or especially I guess Sayreville, which is immediately above the city of Des Moines, is on the Des Moines River, and that and the Raccoon River are sources of water for the city of Des Moines. We get down into the Rathbun, the southeast part of the state. It's the largest rural water system we have in the state of Iowa, and it covers over 7 counties, and it supplies drinking water to a number of cities. And then you get in south central Iowa, there's a complex of 4 or 5 lakes that provide water to cities, and more importantly to our rural residents also. So I don't have an exact percentage number, but in the central and southern part of the state, you see a lot higher percentage of our drinking water that comes from impounded water systems such as lakes.
This question comes from Sue, and she's interested in how much tiling has increased over the past 5 to 8 years, and is the tile directly contributing to lake degradation?
Hi there, Sue. Well, in terms of the lake aspect of it, what we have here would be a situation in terms of quantity of water and how much is moving through, and also in terms of potential loading of nitrates to lakes. So in heavily tiled areas, you know, it would be important to look at that issue and see what type of contributions may be coming from tiled systems, and also as they're being released up above in the landscape, does the flashiness of that system in terms of water, is it having an effect on erosion of streams and other areas that are then draining into the lake? You know, in terms of you know, tiling increases, I don't have any hard numbers, I guess, for you, but it is something that over the past years, people have been reworking older tile, and in many cases that tile is more efficient at getting water off the landscape.
Sue just asked me to clarify that she was specifically talking about flooding in the Cedar River, and actually I think I asked her questions in the wrong order. This is her first question, and it was, after reviewing the map of the lake restoration projects, I noticed 5 priority lakes are in eastern Iowa. Are these lake issues related to the increase of flooding in these sheds over the past few years? And if so, how has flooding increased the degradation speed?
if you look at those maps, or if you get a little farther and look at the size of those lakes, most of those systems in northeastern or eastern Iowa are not very large lakes. And so predominantly the rivers are driving what takes place within the watersheds there, and the amount of landscape that is now concrete that's not either in wetlands or in crop. Our prairie areas are 4 or 5 times more efficient at soaking up water than even crop fields. And so the lakes are really kind of a very, very small portion. We just have changed how these watersheds and these lakes behave, and so that has increased some of our flooding. And we've also changed how we basically live in these flood zones. Historically, people realized if you lived along the river, you paid a price, and every now and then you were flooded. Now we are increasingly building structures that really aren't tolerant of flooding, and we think we're going to engineer our ways out of it. And the bottom line is we're building in floodplains, and when you build in a floodplain, there's always a hazard. And even if you dike those particular systems around a city, that's fine, but all you're doing at that point then is funneling that water then to another portion of the river that maybe will be more subject to flooding, and that would primarily be some of our ag land. So it's a complicated issue within these watersheds that we have here in the lake, and it's been the problem's been accelerated also just with the type of weather patterns that we've had. And there's some of the climate people that are indicating that we're going to see increased, when we get these rain events, they're going to be higher in intensity. And with that, it increases the likelihood and the frequency of flooding problems here within the state.
I have a question from Anne. This is kind of changing subjects a little bit. She asked, do our lakes and rivers contribute to aquifers and groundwater?
Well, there can be a situation in terms of both taking place, both where, the groundwater would be stored in the aquifer, and in some cases, you can have a lake that, depending on where it sits in the landscape, can recharge or put more water into the aquifer. And in other cases, it would be a case where a lake is losing water, and then you can kind of have flow through systems. So there can be, depending on where the lake is in the landscape and its interaction with other systems, a variety of things can be going on. We just recently sat down with our geologists from Iowa City in terms of the DNR, and we're looking at some of the systems in northwest Iowa, and trying to learn about, and even for us, it's a learning curve in terms of how do these systems interact underground, and that their watersheds or their areas of influence are even greater than we think of when we look at just surface conditions and what a typical watershed would be when you just draw it out based on where water is flowing and what the boundaries of the watershed are. And so it is an aspect of projects that typically is lacking the most information when you're looking at nutrient budgets and trying to improve these lakes, and what's the contributing factors to issues. It is typically the one aspect that we know least about or haven't collected enough information on.
See, there are a couple of people typing in questions, and I have a comment from Sue on your answer to her last question that I really wanted to share. She said, thanks. I need your extra opinion to build student confidence regarding my statement. People should not build next to the river in the floodplain just because someone else has already built there. I have a question from Margaret, and she says that she uses alum in cooking. How does alum tie up phosphorus so it will settle to the bottom of a lake? Is there a way of using this method to tie up nitrogen so it will settle and not move downstream?
I am not sure on your nitrogen question. I have not heard of a similar type of approach. But what the alum is doing, yeah, I believe even in some preservation things like pickling and things, I think alum is used. But in this case, it's used to when it forms with phosphorus, it basically develops a flock material or comes together in a flock that then settles to the bottom of the lake. And so basically lakes that are lakes that are high in phosphorus, you can use that to just strip that out of the water column. And we've used it at Carter Lake now, and actually one of the bigger questions then comes into play in terms of how long does it last, and that doesn't necessarily always happen the same way in lakes that have similar traits in terms of their depth and their volume, and so you hope that it's going to be something, we'd say in a 10-year time frame that you'd hope to still be seeing benefits, but that's something you kind of monitor as it's been applied.
In terms of nitrogen, it's very soluble in water, and alum is not a technique that works, and I'm not exactly sure what does, but I do know that Des Moines nitrates are really critical in terms of drinking water, and if it gets too high in nitrates, so many parts per million, it's not healthy for babies or women that are nursing or something to be drinking this water here. And so the city of Des Moines has one of the largest supposedly denitrifying facilities in the United States there, because when we get those big runoff bursts, especially in the spring of the year, a lot of nitrates are injected into the water system, into our rivers, into the lakes there. So it's more of an issue with nitrate removal from a water supply and a drinking water standpoint. It additionally also happens with our wells here in Iowa. You'll see these alerts or these do not boil or don't go ahead and drink water from a well and use bottled water or another source of water until the nitrate levels are down in a particular community's water supply system. So it does happen with frequency here in Iowa, especially in the spring of the year.
One of the websites that I'm not sure if George shared or if Greg shared would have some additional information about nitrates in drinking water, and that's a Explore More website, and that is in the course web links. I have a question from Jeremy, and I think I have one more after that. So Jeremy asks, I've always wondered, he's originally from Ottumwa, and the Des Moines River runs right through town. There's also several lagoons. Are those tied together? Do you know the history behind them, like why they were built?
No, I'm not sure on that. I apologize. The biologist for that area, if you look on your map, or if you're making contacts within the DNR, is located out of Rathbun, and it's Mark Flaming, and that would be the contact person you'd want to ask those specific questions. We do have those lagoons down there, and unfortunately they've taken on a lot of sediment, and they've been impaired for a variety of reasons. Popular that people want to try and use them in the Ottumwa area, but they're definitely a challenge for anyone to manage. But Mark would give us the best answer as to be able to find that. So if you take that information where you found George and I's contact information at the end, and in fact any DNR employee, and if you just go MARK.FLAMMANG, and then use all the rest of the name there at dnr.iowa, all that there. You could ask that specific question of Mark, and hopefully he can get back to you.
I think I still have, oh, I had a comment. Explore More is an awesome website. We use it annually. I have one more question, and that is, if you could help a classroom decide on a project that they wanted to do related to Iowa lakes, do you have any ideas that you might suggest to them?
One thing I would suggest is look at this map or look at our lake restoration site, and you'll see there, and I know not every community or it won't lend itself to them, but you'll see within that site there's a number of projects that we're working on around the state. We have about 27 or 28 active projects right now, and a few more that we'd like to get involved with. And if you're in that region, we'd love to have student groups involved in those things. It's a community-based process, and no better than to start with the students. We've had several towns, the community up in Crystal Lake, Iowa, they've really engaged their kids early on in the process there. And a number of other communities I know over at Harlan. Harlan has been involved a little bit in our Prairie Rose project over there. So look at that to begin with, I guess. The other way to look at it is maybe contact your regional fisheries biologist within those areas, and they might. Let's go beyond lakes. There may be lakes and or even some stream projects that they'd love to see some classes involved with. And they may be a resource that could point your teachers towards and a specific system that that they could get involved with.
I think too, initially, like with these projects, the kids will right off the bat learn that watershed concept. And I think that is always very, makes a big impression in terms of starting by trying to figure out what the watershed is of their given lake, and then from there they really get that concept of, okay, it's a bigger picture than just what I'm dealing with locally, and that leads to what may be potential problems if they're in an agricultural setting versus an urban setting or one that's maybe in transition. And so then they can start thinking about kind of those concepts that come along with that loading issue to lakes and some of the problems that are up above before they even get involved with in-lake aspects. So I think that's a nice way to start too. And as Mike mentioned, the biologist will be a great resource for classrooms.
Thank you. I'm going to switch our layout back to the present and chat just so we have our participants can freely chat now. And I want to say thank you very much to George and to Mike today for sharing. I know I learned an awful lot. I'm going to summarize some of the main points that I saw and how I think they might work with some of your projects in the email I send with the link to be able to replay this webinar tonight. So let's all give a thank you to George and to Mike. And George and Mike, if you have any last words that you want to say before we turn it over, I'll turn the mic over to you.
One last comment. I should have been, I was out in the field for a number of years. We get into the spring and summer and early fall. That can be our really busy field season where people are out. We stay on our emails and really check. But a great time sometimes to catch our biologists to start asking some of these questions. Don't overlook that late fall and winter period. They're most accessible and at their desks rather than out in the field, but they do check their email regularly there. But if you bat or call, I think you have the best chance of really being able to sit down and engage them probably in the late fall and winter.